Hello, Lee County students. We're glad that you joined us today. We have a special guest for you, Mr. Dwight Elam. He's been at our school at Gulf Middle School where I teach. He shared with us in the Sons of the American Revolution, and he's also a part of a Civil War reenacting group. And I understand that his wife, Becky, has helped you with this presentation today. Is that correct, Mr. Elam?
She helped me by doing all the research and doing all the writing, yes.
Well, we thank her too for everything that she's done. But he's going to tell you a little bit today about the Civil War, and he's going to tell you about some of the spying that has gone on in the Civil War. So I'm not going to steal any of his thunder. I'm just going to turn it right over to him. But thank you very much for being here to share with us today, Reverend Elam. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Jeff, it's a great pleasure just because of how well I know you and see your love of the students and love of history. And I share that with you. The Civil War is very important to me, primarily being from Lexington, Kentucky, which is on the dividing line between the North and the South. My grandfather had uncles that fought both for the North and for the South. So we're a part of it. We are from Lexington, which I said, a place you may have heard of, one of our famous citizens. Her name was Mary Todd, married, of course, Abraham Lincoln. Mary Todd Lincoln is from our hometown, and my wife actually went to the Mary Todd School. So we've studied the Civil War, and our love for it's amazing. The title Civil War is really a false title. The word civil, if you look it up, it means an interaction between people or individual or persons. The word war means a armed conflict between nations or peoples. Our Civil War was armed, but I don't think it was very civil. It was a time that brothers were against brothers, fathers were against sons, et cetera, et cetera. And you can spend the rest of the day, if you wish, discussing the cause of the Civil War. There were many causes, depending on what part of the country you're from, depending on what your background was. The main thing was the result. We started having conflict way before 1860. And when we went into the wartime with the shooting of Fort McHenry and all, you've got to realize we weren't prepared. We had talked about it, Johnny Reb and Billy Yank and these type of things. We weren't prepared. There was not a known spy on either side when the war started. You would have thought we would have learned from our spy studies that we did during the Revolutionary War, but we never thought we'd be in another war, especially against one another. So quickly, the two sides needed spies to develop the intelligence to be prepared for the war. A World War II veteran, my uncle, was caught behind the line of the Battle of the Bulge, and he was pontificating one time. He's telling big tales. I said, Hobart, what is a war? He says, boy, I don't care what the books tell you. It's an event where you break things and kill people. And we got to be very, very good at breaking things and killing people, but it wasn't always very efficient at it. So we developed people that would go to the other side and get information. Our first spy system was under General McClellan. Now, he was a terrible general and drug the war out for quite some time, very possibly because he was making money on the war and the war supplies. But he had appointed Alan Pinkerton, who is the famous detective and still has the Pinkerton Society out of Chicago, Illinois. He had a group of people around him that would go incognito, if you would like, to the other side, to the other enemy. Do you realize how close Richmond, Virginia, which was the capital of the South, and Washington, D.C., capital of the North, were very, very close? They knew each other. They looked alike. They dressed alike. And unless you were from the very far north or the very far south, we pretty much talked alike. It's hard, if it's from Boston or Maine somewhere, and the other one's from Alabama or Georgia, maybe they wouldn't pass. But other than that, it pretty much did. So Pinkerton would gather a group of people around him and send them down to Richmond and the surrounding areas to try to get information on General Lee and the troop movements, realizing that in the early part of the war, the South had a definite advantage. They did not have a manpower advantage. They did not have a military might advantage. They did not have equipment advantage, but they had what they thought was the right to do what they were doing. And they were very excited about it. And they gave a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, to quote Winston Churchill, They gave a lot of blood, sweat, and tears because it was their country that they felt were being invaded and being told by the Northerners what to do. McClellan's men would bring back information, and that way he could be ahead of what Lee was doing. Uh, but after McClellan was fired, Pinkerton quit too. He thought, well, I'm with my men in and out, good or bad. So he quit, and it threw the North back into a hole of spies. Eventually, friends would tell friends, do you know something? They would seek them out to see how much they cared about the North or how much they cared about the South, and they would volunteer them. Let me give you a few people that we know, specifically know were spies. Her name was Rose O'Neill Greenhow. She was 40 years old. She was a widow, raised in Washington, D.C., in a boarding house run by her aunt and uncle, located right across the street from the White House. How close can you get to the enemy? Familiar with a lot of the government officials, have them over for dinner. They would eat in the parlor of the boarding house. They knew each other. She was so involved in the Washington elite that she would be invited to the big hooplas and the galas and all the parties. Little did they know that Rose was giving information to General Lee and his men. And when people would talk, and you know, if one person knows it, it's a secret. If two people knows it, three's going to real quick. That's the way the spy business works. And they would spread out that information. You remember, Jeff, I'm sure that, I hope you do, that when we talked about the Revolutionary War, how with a little bit of alcohol and a little bit of bravado, that those generals for the British Army would tell a lot of things they shouldn't have told. Well,
Right.
Men haven't changed any. It's still that way, and they were doing it in those days. The Miss Rose got around her her own spy network. There were 48 women and 2 men. So don't tell me, boys, that the women cannot keep a secret, because they all had to keep the secrets or they all would have been caught. They say a officer in a uniform or even a private in a uniform that's captured is a prisoner of war. A spy who is out of uniform is captured, they're hung. So if the word got out that you were a spy, or you let it be known that you were spying, or people were suspicious, you quickly would die. She was close friends of Henry Wilson, the Senate military commissioner, and would go in and listen to the meetings while she was serving them and hear all the information. She might as well placed a tap on his phone if they'd had a phone back then. She went across the Potomac from time to time and would get that information. Finally, Pinkerton put Rose under superstition. He watched her because he thought she was doing too much, she was seeing too much, and somehow the enemy, Robert E. Lee's troops, knew what was going on really before the military guys knew what was going on. So she was a Southern belle, turned to be a Northern sympathizer, who was really a Southern spy, but she was a lady. And they dressed her up, wrapped her hand in arms, in chains, took her across Potomac River, gave her to one of the generals, and said, please take care of her and don't let her come back. She was successful. The North, at the same time, had a lazy lady that was grown up in the South, down in Richmond. Her name was Elizabeth Van Loo. They called her Crazy Bet, short for Elizabeth. She would listen to anything, hear anything. At one time, she had some information that she wanted to get up to the Northern Army. She dressed herself up, colored her face as a black slave, picked up the Southern lingo that she knew, and actually walked over, got across the river, and went straight to the Union Army and told them. It was very difficult when a spy knows what you know, and they don't know, and the information is ahead of you. Jenny, here's a pair of sisters, Jenny and Lottie Moon. Jenny was 18-year-old. Her sister Lottie was 32 at the time. Compassionate, loved to do favors, the belle of every ball. They were just the ladies, if you may say. They had been born into an old Virginia family, yet raised in Ohio. So they had mixed feelings. You know, when you're being brought up, when your father's got a job, when your mother's raising a family, you don't care where the line is from north to south. You just wanted to get by. Matter of fact, my grandfather's father tells a story and it's written in a book about the history of the war in Kentucky, that he was shooting marbles one day in front of a school. Two Southern soldiers came riding through town, shooting and shooting, killed a mule, dressed it, took it back to the army to eat right then. And frequently, his father owned a big farm. The Union Army would come in, chop down all the trees, build fences, have firewood, eat their animals, and then leave. 6 months later, the Southern Army would come through their farm, cut all the trees down, build fences, get firewood, kill the animals, ate them. Right after they left, my grandfather's father got up and went to the mountains where the armies couldn't find him. There was just that much of trenches going back and forth. Jenny was in boarding school, and Jenny didn't like boarding school. She and her husband, Lottie and her husband, both were involved in secret meetings. Now, I guess in those days, without lights, spotlights on the houses, without personal TV cameras, without a lot of things we have today, you could have a secret meeting. Going down like you're going to church. You make a left instead of go to right, end up at a barn, and you talk to people. And in these meetings, they would plot what information the North needed. See, a Confederate spy came to him one day dressed as an Irish washerwoman. And she said, General Lee needs this information. What can you find us? Well, they were very easy to get around. They traveled, they asked the questions, and they brought the information back. On the way to tell General Lee, Lottie was stopped by a Union soldier. He said, I'm going to search you, see what kind of information you got on you. She put out a pistol, put it in the face of the Union soldier. You touch me, you die. It's what she proclaimed. You're not going to touch a Southern woman. I don't care how many guns you have or how many men you have in your army. So the military soldier took her back to his house and had a woman search her and found out that she had all types of weapons, of medicine, of guns hidden in her outfit. He said, you're going to be under arrest. She said, I will do nothing of the kind unless you take me to General Burnside's house. He knew who General Burnside was. He was surprised she did. Well, he said, okay, because she kept insisting. Went to General Burnside's house. Comes to find out that General Burnside had been engaged to her older sister, Lottie, when they were both teenagers. She was granted immunity. She stayed in General Burnside's house till the end of the war. Near the end of the war, 2 more prisoners came and showed up, Lottie and her husband. So there was some civility, there was some chivalry involved in the war, but there was some trickiness. Another time, Lottie had been outgoing before she was caught. A different soldier came up to her, wanted to search her and arrest her. She evidently wore the big Annabella dresses that flowed, and you put a lot of stuff on it. And they said, we think this one's a spy. She's seen too many places. And they said, have the doctor examine her. Well, every time the doctor would touch her, she'd scream in pain, bend over. Really was very powerful in her image. Doctor said, carried her back down the steps, says, this woman is no harm to you. She's so eaten up with arthritis that she can't do anything. She was 22. She had no arthritis, but she was very good as an actress. Later on, she was taking a coffin back from Canada to the South. Now, it was filled with opium and drugs and morphine and stuff for the Southern soldiers that had been wounded. She cried and wept. And when somebody wanted to open up the coffin, you're going to open the coffin up, and my dear dead husband, he's been in that box for 3 days, and just put on the woman almost a Mission Impossible type of a story. Of course, they let her go. She went down the road and got where they wanted. Later on, after the war, Jenny adopted, actually was a foster mother to a child who wanted to become an actress. She went to California with her and started watching what was going on and really liked to see the acting. She volunteered for parts. They weren't talkies back then. I know some of your young people would have no idea what the silent movies were. But she played with a person by the name of Douglas Fairbanks, who was the original Robin Hood. And in her 80s, I guess she played an older part, no doubt. 5 years later, she moved to Greenwich Village in New York. So this lady went from California the New York back in the days when the railroads would have been hard to get on, let alone there wasn't any airplanes. And there she died at the age of 81, 1925. So she played a part, she had acted well, and she did her job. If you saw Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, we're old enough to. I'm not sure your students have ever seen it, unless it's on the older nation. But when they were hiding, all the time there was a group of men on horses chasing them. They were the Pinkerton men, from the same Alan Pinkerton that had gotten his start back in the first part of the Civil War. And Alan Pinkerton got a large team of men dressed in the bowler hats, with the suits, with the vests, and the watch in the pockets. They look more like our CIA or our FBI today than they do the military. And they would send them to different parts of the country to try to find the spy. So it was spy versus spy is what was going on. And it was a game within itself, you must say. There was a lady by the name of Elizabeth Baker. Now, Miss Baker, another Northerner who was actually raised in the South but loved the North, was sent to the South to be a spy, a one-gang spy. She got in again with the rich clientele and gussied up, all dressed prim and proper and very elegant looking. She was invited to a dinner to meet with one of the generals and one of the shipbuilders in that area in the South. She went with him to see the Navy, but then even more than that, she went with him to the shipyard. And there was the funniest looking thing she'd ever seen. A long, round cylinder with one little hole in the top and a hose pipe coming out of it. She saw the first Confederate submarine. They were building them there. And the idea was you would go under the water, not real deep, but you would go underwater. It would be moved by a spinner that would have a small propeller on the end. You would get up to a wooden ship. Remember, most, except for the Monitor and Merrimack, most of the ships were wooden back then. Either a diver would come out and take a torpedo and attach it to the hull, or some of them actually had a spear onto them, where they would ram the boat. The spear would pull out when they backed up, and the torpedo bomb would stay there. A very long fuse would be lit. The guys would get out of the way, hopefully. The fuse would blow up, and the military might of the Union Army, which was very strong with the Navy, would be crippled. Well, Miss Baker was scared to death when she saw that and got the message back real quick to the Northern Army. And they took huge fishing nets, not little dip nets, but big long, like our commercial fishermen would have used. They took these huge fishing nets and wrapped it all the way around the Navy that night. When the two ships went out, they got entangled in the ship, in the the netting, and were pulled ashore. One of the captains of one of the boats actually went out and pulled the hose out of the top. It filled with water and drowned the guys. So here, this one lady, Miss Baker, saved hundreds, if not thousands, of lives, because at that time there were 6 or 7 more of the submarine. Sub means below, marine means water, below the water, much larger, were being built. After they saw the sinking of this and what a net would do to it, that was the end of the submarine corps for quite some time. Miss Elizabeth Van Loo worked on a farm, and there she could pick up a message. She developed a system that she had read about years ago, back in the Roman times, of a dead drop. Instead of meeting somebody and handing them a note, you would say, go to the 3rd apple tree by the road. There'll be a rock on the bottom. Lift it up, and there will be the note. When you run to write me something, you go back to the same place. It's called a dead drop. Nobody sees anybody else. They're protected. All we know is a place to meet. She developed the dead drop on her farm, and it was a tremendous amount of messages that would be back and forth. Now, something that you may not read much about is that the high amount of importance that the Black and Negro population played in the spying. Much like we talked about with the Revolutionary War, where the women could be everywhere and nobody knows them, the Black servants could go anywhere, in or out, and nobody would pay any attention because they wouldn't think, well, these aren't spies, these are household servants. And the black servants would hear things. They had one man who was, excuse me, they had one of the ladies, Miss Van Hulou, who had a photographic memory. Anything she saw, anything she heard, she remembered. And she would go into a colonel or a major or a general's office, read every note he had on his desk, go to a dinner meeting, serve food, and hear every conversation, would go back and write it down. She could write, even though it was illegal for blacks to be able to read and write at that time. She would write it down. It would be passed up to the north, and the word would get out, and the preparations for a lot of the battles were thwarted. She later on became the postmistress of the of Richmond, Virginia. Was awarded that job. The first woman who had an official government job in the 19th century. So a lot of people were raised. Mary Jane Richards was inducted into the Army Intelligence Hall of Fame. So they were recognized a lot more after the Civil War. Well, you know, Paul Harvey called it, if you remember Paul Harvey, he called it the uncivil war.
Yeah.
So there was nothing civil about this war whatsoever. And rewarded for that. Oh, Rebecca Wright. Rebecca Wright had an unusual position in life. She was a Quaker. And just as it was in the Revolutionary War, the Quakers had vowed to stay out of military conflict. So when either side saw a Quaker family, they stayed away from them. They considered them innocents who had no part of the war at all, and they would not touch them one way or another. The problem was that Miss Rebecca had more feelings about the war than she did about the Quaker Church. So she would use that freedom that she had and find things out. Matter of fact, there's one day she got a message from General Sheridan asking for information about the Confederates. Sheridan had put together 120 people that he trusted and to assist him to arrest a big group of the Confederates. She heard about this and stopped the arrest and probably the execution of all of those people. Whatever it was, she said, I cannot let this happen. It's just not the right thing to do. Later on, her mother and she moved to Washington, D.C., where they were awarded with government jobs. I guess you think after the war, well, isn't it about that way in politics now, though? At least on the state, when one side wins, the one party wins, a lot of their own people, the ones that helped support them, were brought in. But this was that way in the Civil War as well. A lot of the jobs were passed along, and people were rewarded for that. Now, my favorite part. It's my favorite part because it actually involves an event that happened with my own family, my grandfather's aunt. As far back as 1782, France had invented a hot air balloon. Now, I thought they came along, you know, with the circuses in the 1900s. No, it goes all the way back. They were sometimes silk, sometimes cotton material, wetted down a little bit, originally put over a bamboo or a wooden frame, stretched out, very light. It would actually look like a big upside down egg, a big fat part at the top, smaller part at the bottom. Depending on the size of it, could hold anywhere from 1 to 6 people. They were originally called hot air balloons because there would be a fire, and they would hold the opening part over the fire, and they thought it was the smoke, but it was actually the heat, of course, would come up, blow the balloon out, and for the period of time they would hold the heat, it would stay aloft. Some of these balloons would stay up as high as 1,000 feet. Now, would you think you'd like to put a shirt, put it over top of a heating coil or some kind of a barbecue pit, let it blow up and go up 1,000 feet in the air? Not me. But they did. Now, they did develop it from on into leather coverings and silky material coverings more than just a cloth. They also found out that if you mix sulfuric acid and iron filings, now please do not try this at home. Sulfuric acid is a deadly poison. It will eat you up. It'll blind you so fast. And when it gets with the iron, it produces a gas. It produces sodium hydroxide. And this gas would be much lighter than air, and it would take the balloon up very quick. Plus, you didn't have to have a big place to heat it. They could take the balloon and this gas-producing machine on the back of a carriage, fill up the balloon, and fly it. And they use it for observation. I haven't heard yet. I don't know why, but I haven't heard yet that they ever used it for sniping or for dropping bombs. We know in World War II they would just hand drop bombs out of the biplane. World War One, they would drop hand bombs out of a biplane. But we talked about that. But they would unreel a leash, let it go up as high as 1,000 feet, and they could see Grant's army. They could see Lee's army a long enough way. There was even a time that they would take enough telephone wire, telegraph wire, let's call it, and a telegraph person would go up in the air and dash and all that until they would say 1,000 feet to the right, go over the second hill, and could directly communicate about as good as you could with a cell phone or a two-way, as long as the wire didn't get tangled up. They would stay up there as long as the sodium hydroxide would be powerful, and then they would come down, reel them back. Now, the only problem is, every once in a while, the rope would get loose. And there you go, like letting go of a kite, 1,000 feet in the air, with a rope that may drift over water, it may drift over a mountain, it may drift over the enemy's camp. Well, you got to know that if that rope drifts over the enemy's camp, they're going to grab a hold of it real quick, and you're going to have a different place to sleep that night. But after about a year or so of use, it fell through. It just wasn't active enough. They actually did this on the White House to show President Lincoln what was happening. He was thrilled. He wanted to start an entire Air Force. I don't think they call it that, but an entire Air Corps of balloons to be able to send men up and get information. So that is just, to me, one of the greatest things. They actually had a war of words over who would be the first chief aeronaut. They called them aeronauts in those days. They'd be in charge of all the air balloons that was going on. I guess truly you could say they had a bird's eye view, being 1,000 feet in the air. And both the Union and the Confederacy both had them. One of them was so large, it was called the Intrepid. It held 32,000 cubic feet of air. That's about the size of the University of Florida's football field, all compacted in the air. Of course, it was held tight, and it would be very, very active, very expensive, and had to be very well taken care of. They abandoned the Air Corps in 1863. It just got too expensive. Did I lose you? Return to the meeting.
I'm still here. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. It clicked out on me. Oh, by the way, do you know what became of a lot of the guys who worked on the Air Corps, the aeronauts? They got into the Zeppelin field, the dirigibles, as in the Hindenburg.
Yeah.
So they went from a hot air balloon that was willy-nilly so they could turn it long ways, capture it, and put that gondola down the bottom. Wow. And then they found out that hydrogen, of course, would take them up a lot quicker, a lot cheaper, until the event of the Hindenburg, what man, humanity to man, and humanity to man, and it blew up and burned during the First World War. So a lot of things were learned. I guess the thing to say is, in times of peace and war, men and women did what they thought was best. They turned away from people who thought they loved and cared for to what was the right cause. Fighting for the cause is a lot better than just fighting to be fighting. And these people were very devout for the North and for the South, and the people in the middle from getting run over by either bunch of them. But it was just amazing what the spies made the difference, and how the smallest child, or the oldest little old lady, or the frailest man can make a difference if nobody pays attention to who they are and not give them the respect that they do. Folks, this is Dwight Elam. I've enjoyed it immensely. Hope we get to meet again. I hope this brought a little information into your life. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Dwight. Let me see. Let's go this way. Here we go. Wow. I was just thinking as you were talking, all of us, our students that are watching this, we've seen a lot of different spy movies. Well, kids, these are real stories. These are true things that are really happening. And I was saying, as you were telling the story about the balloons, there's actually a movie that they made on Amazon Prime, if you haven't, it's called The Aeronauts, and it's about one of the scientists to see how high he could go. So if you get a chance, that's a really interesting movie. But thank you so much for sharing with us today. And thank Mrs. Elam for her research and all the time that she's put into this. And I'd like our students to know, if you want to know more about the Civil War, if you want to know more about reenacting, I've had some students been involved in that. Let us know, because we would be more than happy to answer your questions. And thank you again, Dwight, for coming today and for sharing with us. And we thank you very much for putting in your time.
As they said, Chick-fil-A, it was truly my pleasure.
Okay, thank you. All right.